Hey, so in this video, we're going to be taking a look at taking the raw locomotion data from the Rokoko Smartsuit Pro and then applying that to a custom rig. And I basically just want to show you the process that I would take when using motion capture, specifically for things like walk cycles or run cycles, and then basically transferring that into Maya and then going through the process that I take when editing motion capture data specifically for things like walk cycles. So I just wanted to take a real quick moment and talk about this channel's new sponsor, Rokoko. If you haven't heard of Rokoko before, they are basically a company that focuses on making more affordable motion capture solutions for independent developers and animators. And as an animator working in the game industry, obviously you utilize a lot of motion capture within the pipeline. So this gives me a chance to really test out a more affordable solution that allows more artists to actually get their hands on motion capture technology. It's typically something that has a pretty big barrier to entry. If you're working in a big, AAA studio or a big film company, they'll probably have, really expensive solutions, but this allows you to get really good motion capture data at a pretty affordable price. So they reached out to me and sent me their indie creator bundle, and I've been using the suit for several weeks now, and I actually have a video covering my experience using the suit, going over, capturing the data, the setup process, as well as applying to a custom rig, and really talking and showing really the quality that you get from just the straight raw data. So currently Rokoko is doing a big sale on their indie creator bundle, which is 40% off, which includes the smart gloves, the Smartsuit Pro, and the face capture. So basically everything that you need to jump in and start shooting motion capture. But I also have a discount code. So it's RKK_Mark_Masters. And if you use that at checkout, you get an additional 5% off. So total would be 45% off if you're using that discount code. So yeah, I'm excited to have them part of this channel. I'm excited to jump in and start creating some content around motion capture. So with that, let's jump back into this video. So real quickly, I just want to show you the motion capture data inside of Rokoko, just a few things that I captured. And you can see me here basically just capturing these various walk cycles in my dining area. Basically, this just is the most space I have in my house. This kind of area allows me to walk around and do these walk cycle movements. So this first walk cycle here is this sort of like patrol style walk, thinking about this being more like maybe an enemy character within the game. And this is the walk that they would do when they're sort of maybe just like patrolling back and forth, kind of a casual walk, right? They're not engaged in combat at all. They're more just like sort of walking around, patrolling the area. So in this case, it's kind of just a basic, I'm acting out like I'm holding a gun, because I know for this I'm going to be using the Stormtrooper rig, and you can actually find the Stormtrooper rig on the Agora community website. This is the rig right here, so you can download it for Maya. I believe there's also a Blender version. Yeah, there's also a Blender version. So this is the rig that we're going to be applying this motion capture to. So I know that it has a gun here. So I'm already sort of like acting that out within the motion capture session. So this is the basic kind of walk that I'm doing, just the sort of looking back and forth movement there. And you can see there's a few kind of like jitters in the hips. There's a few hitches in the leg. And I'm going to show you sort of the process that I take when, taking this motion capture data from Rokoko and getting it onto our custom rig. And I also have another version. This is not the one we're going to be using. I may do this in a separate video, but this is the sort of like seeking style walk. So this is if like the enemy is actually, alerted and they know there's sort of a threat nearby. Maybe you made a noise and now they're sort of in their searching mode. So this would be kind of like the walk that they would do, where a little bit faster, they're sort of actually searching. They have their gun up, kind of looking left and right during the actual walk. Let me jump back to the patrol here. So when I'm using this motion capture from the Smartsuit Pro here, what I'm actually going to do to make this process easier for me is that I want to make sure that this motion capture is converted to an actual treadmill cycle. So you can see that the raw motion capture data is actual, full translation on the torso here. So it's actually moving through 3D space throughout this movement. And this is fine. We can use this if we wanted to, but I find that especially for things like walk cycles, it's much easier to edit things if it's in that treadmill sort of cycle. And one reason that I like to do that specifically with the Rokoko motion capture data is that for the most part, the data is really clean, but I notice a few hitches in things like the hips, the torso. There's like a few moments where, yeah, there's like a little bit of like jittery spacing kind of inconsistencies with the hips as far as it moving forward in 3D space. So the hips actually translating forward. There's like a few moments where it feels like it speeds up a little bit unnaturally, like right in that moment there. So that's something that we could take this motion capture data as is, clean that up in Maya. You could also experiment with Rokoko Studio's kind of built-in editing tools. And for things like, especially the feet through here, some of the knee pops, you can go through here and adjust the foot locks if you want to and actually tweak those. But I find, at least with my workflow, I'm able to edit things much faster inside of Maya. So for things like editing the footfalls and that kind of thing, I'll just do that in Maya. But in order to make this, again, just a much easier for us, I always convert any of this walk cycle locomotion stuff to a treadmill cycle. So that removes any of the actual forward translation on the hips. So you still get side to side movement, but you don't actually get it translating forward through 3D space. Hence the treadmill style of a walk, as if it's on like kind of an endless treadmill. So this allows me to much more easily edit this data inside of Maya and get a cycle really quickly using this motion capture data that I captured here. So let's actually just jump into Maya. And again, we have our Stormtrooper rig, and we expand our timeline a bit. And one thing to note is that I will be using the Animbot toolkit, some of the tools in here, to basically copy poses and that kind of thing. So that's one thing to keep in mind. So we have the Stormtrooper rig here, and I already just imported the raw FBX file straight from Rokoko Studio. I exported it out, and then I can play it here, and you can see this is our raw motion capture. So we have it in our scene, and it's staying in that treadmill cycle, which is exactly what we want here. So now we just need to apply this to our rig. So I'm gonna go over here to the human IK. And another thing to note is that I already have this set up to a custom rig. I'm not gonna go through the entire process of setting this up. There's tons of YouTube videos on this, using the human IK to set up your custom rig on here. But something that I've noticed is that it bugs out a little bit from time to time. Oops, let me open that up, where it kind of cuts out the bottom here. And usually if I just jump back and forth, it usually fixes it, but it doesn't seem like it's going to, but it should be fine. But basically what this custom rig is that we went through this process of selecting like the root control, right clicking, assigning that to the selected effector here in the custom rig. And that allows us to basically choose the control curves that we want to actually have this motion capture data applied to. So one thing that I still need to do is I need to take my raw motion capture data. Let me actually go to the outliner, the FBX file for this. And let me go, to none on character. And I'm going to do create character definition. I'm going to select the hip. I'm going to right click and select or assign bone to the hip bone here in our definition. And then what I can do is go up here to this load skeleton definition. And this is a human IK skeleton, so I can just do that as a template, and then it will automatically load all of that out. Because inside of Rokoko, you can choose to export it out as an human IK skeleton, which makes this process that you can see really quick, so we don't have to go through here and assign every single bone to its corresponding skeleton bone here. So that just makes it a lot faster. All right, so now that we have the definition created, what we need to do is go back to character. We'll go to character 1 custom rig, then we'll go to our source and we'll choose the character 2, the new definition that we just created, which contains the FBX skeleton with the motion capture on it. That will apply that to our rig. And there we go. So now we've got this motion capture applied to our custom rig here. And I'm actually going to turn off the cache playback because I think that's slowing things down quite a bit. So now that we have the motion capture applied, you can see the arms are a little bit funky here. They're going through the chest, but that's perfectly fine. We're mainly just going to build a pose for those, for the actual arms when they're holding the weapon. You can see the feet are kind of pointed outward, but a lot of that foot movement we'll just adjust on an animation layer. But what I want to do now is basically pick out the cycle that we want for this. So I'm going to go through here and kind of see, you can see the knee, the pole vectors for the knees aren't following at least this direction for the cycle, which is fine. I don't really need, I'm not going to use this direction, I don't think. I think I might use the cycle that happens right around here. I think that might work. So somewhere right around here. And what I want to do now is find the pose that I want. So we'll start with something like this, maybe around 878 for, call this the passing position. So I'm going to put that in the timeline down there. And then I want to find basically the mirrored version, or not the mirrored version, the copy of that pose. So we want to make sure we have the head looks in here, the right, and then the forward, and then kind of back left. So I think right around frame 1,000, that looks like it matches up pretty closely. So what I'm going to do is put in 1,000 there. Then I can jump between these two poses for the start and the last frame of the cycle. So now this gives us sort of the looping pose that we need. Even though it's a little bit different, we can adjust that and make sure that it matches on an animation layer. But this gives us basically our entire walk cycle right here. The nice looping animation, the looking around left and right for the looping cycle. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that typically when working in games, specifically for a cycle like this, like a patrol cycle where, you know, the enemy is going to might be like looking around left and right, sometimes it's better to build these different look directions on kind of a separate layer within the game, so that basically the loop doesn't contain all the looks, the look left and the look right. It doesn't contain that in the loop itself. The loop might just be a regular kind of patrol loop that's looking forward, and then you create these separate layers of the variation of like the looking around that you can then add on top of that loop. That way it doesn't look so scripted. So it doesn't always play the exact same, like looking left or right at the exact same time. Whereas in this case, because we have those looks built into the actual loop itself, it's going to be pretty easy to spot this in game if it actually has to travel a pretty far distance, where it might play this loop 3 or 4 times. You'll easily see this sort of like weird robotic feeling of it always looking to its right first, middle, and then left, and then back to center, and then it's just going to be repeating that through the loop. So in this case, it doesn't really matter. It's a tutorial, so I want to kind of just show you the process. But specifically thinking about if you're working in games, this might be something where, you know, you have more of a generic cycle, and then you layer on that detail on top of that the game engine can kind of just play on its own to add that variation to the cycle itself. But that's just something to keep in mind if you are interested in kind of working in games that you might run into pretty often. So we have our loop here, and I think this works pretty well. I think I like the length of the cycle, and the first and last pose are already pretty closely matched together. So I think this is going to work well. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back to my human IK. I'm going to go over here to this button, and then I'm going to choose bake, and then I'm going to choose bake to custom rig and sample by 1. So it's going to bake on 1s, and then I'll just hit bake. So that's going to bake everything down for this cycle. And because I have it separated onto the chunk of the time that I want, if I go to the settings again and go to custom rig, it's based on the time slider. So it's not going to bake the entire section of this motion capture data. This motion capture was, I think pretty close to 2,000 frames. So we're just cutting out a ton of that information and just using what we need there. So now we only have this cycle, which works great for us. And if we want to, we can just delete out this motion capture data. It's not applied to anything. And now we've actually got all that animation baked onto the control curves themselves. And now we're able to just start tweaking this animation and adjusting it as we need. So now comes the pretty fun part of, taking this raw motion capture data, cleaning it up, getting it to a cycle that works well. We don't have, the sliding of the feet back and forth. So let's go ahead and start cleaning that stuff up. You can see our character is floating above the ground based on where that motion capture data was. We can actually bring this closer to the floor by just taking the main rig control, moving everything down. And I'm actually going to create a floor. So I'm going to drop in a plane just so we can have a floor surface here. And we can actually see a little bit better what is actually the floor there. And I can turn on the ambient occlusion so we can see the feet, see that shadow on the feet there. So yeah, let's go ahead and start cleaning this up. Now, one thing I will say that you saw me go through the process of, assigning the skeleton to our custom rig here. One of the benefits of working in a studio is that a lot of the times they have all of these custom tools built. So usually if you're working with motion capture data, you're able to, utilize some type of tool that the company has built where, for their custom rigs, they have a setup where basically you're just taking the motion capture data you captured and then it applies it to the custom rig, basically with just the click of a button. And so you don't have to go through the whole, human IK setup process, which makes it a little bit easier. So with this, I don't have access to any typical tools that you might get working at a studio. So I'm kind of doing it the old fashioned way. And I've actually only ever done this a couple times. So some of you might know the process better of actually getting your motion capture applied to a custom rigs, because I'm so used to kind of using the company's tools as a crutch sometimes. But let's go ahead and add a animation layer. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to select, let me turn off polygon selection, select all the control curves here, and I'm going to add a selection set for just all the control curves. Usually when working, I always create just a few custom selection sets as I'm going through here. I'll usually have selection sets for the fingers and that kind of thing, but for this, I'll just have the all for now. So one thing that we can do right off the bat is I'll select all. So I'm going to go to this tool right here, which is the copy pose. I'm going to select it, and then I'm going to add an animation layer. I'm going to press S on frame 878. I'm going to press S on frame 1000. And then I'm just going to paste that pose just to make sure that now the first and last pose is exactly the same. So now we're able to get a cleaner loop. So if I jump between these two poses, now you can see we've just created the loop there and made sure that last frame is the exact same pose as the first frame of our cycle. So now we're getting a really nice clean cycle for this. All right, so now we have the main pose, and as I've mentioned before in some of my other videos, I usually don't name my animation layers. So if you want to, you can name yours, but I'll just usually just keep it unnamed. A lot of the times I'll kind of add some layers and I might bake them down back to the main layer as I work as well. So one thing that I want to do is that we're working with a treadmill cycle, but we are going to need actual translation forward movement at some point as well, because when you're working on a cycle, it's okay to work in this treadmill mode, but you also need to actually see it translating through 3D space to see kind of the speed of things and how things are really looking when it's translating. So what I'm going to do is, for the main control, let me actually open up my graph editor and I'll just snap it right here. I want to add some forward translation, should be on the Z control, or the Z channel, I mean, and this will allow us to add that forward translation. So to do this, I'm going to kind of just guess, and tweak this forward value until I get something that feels like it matches the speed of our steps and the gait of our steps. I'm going to change this to both linear tangents, create a perfectly straight line. And you can see, obviously right off the bat, way too small of a forward translation for the steps and the cycle. So I'm going to need to really increase how far it goes forward until I start to see, basically what I want to see here is I want to see a minimal amount of foot sliding. And of course I can tweak that and adjust that later and reduce some of that foot sliding, but I want to capture like the main speed of this movement. And to do that, I can just really kind of just guess and start adjusting this value until I land on something that works. And this is looking better, obviously, but it's still too slow. Too much foot sliding. So I can increase it. And again, I'm just looking at kind of how this feels overall. How do the feet feel, or how much are they sliding backwards during these steps? And this, I think, is something closer to what I would want. And I might be able to increase it maybe just a little bit more. And actually, this might actually be okay, because one thing you want to keep in mind is that there's some sliding back and forth with the foot control. So if I'm looking at this, the foot is sliding forward, right, through here. But if I want to keep the foot locked down, it's going to have to stay in a position right around here. So if I just select this copy world space right here, and then I jump forward to where the foot is still going to be planted, and then I can just paste it, you can see the foot is going to be pretty far back. I'm going to have to add more foot roll to that. So I think the feet kind of moving back and forth, sliding forward here, sliding forward again. I'm not going to be able to have any of that foot sliding. The feet are going to be completely locked down. So that means I might have really huge gaits for each step, which won't look correct. So what I'm thinking I might do is I might take this and I might just reduce that forward translation just a little bit. Something like that should work. All right, so now what I want to do is I want to make sure my main control is selected, and I'm going to select this button right here, which just copies the animation. So we really only have 2 keyframes, but it's going to copy that. And now that that's copied, what I'm going to do is select the foot controls. The knee pivots are following the feet, so I don't need to actually select those. And I think the only thing I'll need to select now is the hip control. So basically what we want is to be able to move the entire character around with these 2 selections. So I'm going to go down here to the copy world space. I'm going to open up the drop down and I'm going to choose copy Xform world space for the entire playback range. So it's copied everything. And then I'm going to go over here, or actually before I do that, I'm going to delete this keyframe. So I've removed that forward motion. I'm going to select the 2 feet controls, select the hip control, then I'm going to go to the paste Xform world space, and I'm going to choose bake frames. And that should go through the process of baking all of that down to keyframes. And now it's taken that movement from that forward translation. We copied it using the Xform world space. We removed the forward translation and then pasted it. So now we just keep all of that forward motion. And we've removed it from the main master control. All right, so that's looking pretty good. And if you don't have Animbot, you could also do this with the World Bake tool from the Morgan Loomis toolkit. I have a video dedicated on this toolkit if you want to download it, but this is a completely free toolkit, and this tool right here basically does the exact same thing that I just did with Animbot. It's just a little bit more of a manual process, but it still only takes a couple seconds to run through that as well. So now that I have that pasted to the actual control curves, what I want to do is I want to add a new animation layer, and then I'm going to hit the paste button. because I want to paste all of that forward motion that we created for the main control and then that we removed. And for some reason, when I use the paste tool, sometimes it just pastes it really far down the timeline for some reason, which obviously I don't want. So I'm just going to drag all that here back to my animation range. So I pasted all of that. And now that I pasted it, we're basically going to get double translations because it's the control curves of the character rig are moving forward and then the main control is moving forward. So all I need to do is take this last keyframe, take a look at that value. I'm going to hit the minus button to flip it. So this gives me the ability to now have it be a treadmill walk cycle. So this is the only animation layer I usually name for doing this with walk cycles and working with walk cycles like that is I'll just name this offset. And then that way, if I want to work with this as a treadmill walk, because sometimes it's a lot easier to edit the data that way and edit your cycle, is that I can keep the offset layer turned on. And then when I want to see it forward translation through space, I mute it. And then now I can actually see how the character looks when it's moving through space. So this is the exact same workflow I use all the time when I'm working and editing walk cycles like this, is that I have that layer with basically the main control now is just countering what the actual character rig is doing and moving backward in space while it's moving forward in space to create the treadmill effect there. All right, so now that we have that set, what I can do is I'm going to start throwing in some animation layers. And again, I'm not going to name them, and I'm probably going to work pretty quickly because that's the workflow that I use, is that I like to just go in here and I'm going to start adding in a bunch of layers, bring the arm out a little bit, start getting this into like a rough pose. Actually, let me undo that because I didn't put this on the animation layer, so I'm going to do that. And then kind of adjust that like that. So now we have at least the arm outside of the body there. And then on this arm, I'll shift select all three controls, add a new layer, go to frame 1, press S, and then I'll start tweaking this. And this is going to be kind of a strange pose, just because the actual gun is pretty small. It's a pretty small gun, so he's going to be like keeping it tucked pretty close to his body. But let me see if there's any options here to just snap the gun to any one of these hands. Sometimes these controls have like little weapon slot curves that you can just snap a gun to, but it doesn't look like it has it. At least I'm not seeing it. All right, that's fine. Add that layer to it, the hand to the layer, and then bring it out a bit. I'll just very quickly grab this gun and just start at least getting it in the hand so that I can start kind of know what the arms need to do and what the hands need to do if it actually needs to hold it in front of him like this. This is not the best position to pose the gun. Probably be easier to do something like this if the character was in its kind of like default pose. But I'll just quickly get it kind of roughly into position. What I want to do real quickly is I'm going to select just a bunch of these curves, and then I'm going to deselect anything that's not the fingers. So I think, yeah, that whole chunk of fingers. So I'm going to add a new selection set for our fingers. Do the same for the left real quick. Again, as I'm working, I'll usually start adding the selection sets as I go. Good thing about this is that if you're working on the same rig really often, that you can create your selection sets like that and then export them out and then import them back into any scene that you're working with to have all your same selection sets for your rig. So you really only have to do this once for a rig. Actually, before I do that, let me make sure I'm on at least one of these layers, and I'm on that base animation layer we created with the pose, so that's fine. I can do that on this pose or on this layer. And then again, I'm just going to quickly pose the fingers because this is not the most interesting thing to watch. Just watching someone pose fingers. So I'm just going to get them like really roughly into position here. They're not quite gripping the handle, but it's all right for now. Might need to move the hand up just a little bit. Let me go to this animation layer. Move it up. Something like that. Maybe move the gun back a little bit. Maybe back a little bit more. It's kind of going through the hand, but it actually looks a little bit better if it's further back on the hand, because then the fingers can actually wrap around the handle of the gun. All right, so we've got pretty quick pose. The fingers look kind of broken, but that's fine. Just a very quick pose for the gun. That looks all right. Now I'm gonna take, I guess I'll just do a parent constraint on this. Let's see. So I'm gonna select the wrist, and then I'm gonna select the gun. I'm gonna go to constrain parent. Now the gun is gonna follow the hand. So now we at least have the gun moving, following the hand as it should. And I'm gonna select the selection set for the hands, or the fingers. I'm gonna make sure I copy the pose for the last frame as well. All right. That's looking all right. So now what I want to do is I want to probably need to change this to IK. Be easier. What I want to actually do is just merge the base layer and the animation layer, which is really the animation layer for the first and last pose, to make sure those are the same. I'm just going to merge those. Might take just a second here. All right, let's select this. I think this is for the arm. Yeah, so I'm gonna turn IK all the way up. And I'm actually gonna delete all these keyframes so that I just have to do it on that first frame. And now what I wanna do is start posing the hand and get it into position. Is this, not sure what this is supposed to be, the hinge for the gun? I guess it can go out like that, so make more sense, I guess, if the hand is like holding here. And maybe this is, I mean, this might not be the best gun. That it almost feels like more of a handgun. You can almost just hold it with one hand. So for this, I'm gonna go ahead and, just like I did before, just quickly get the fingers into some type of pose that's not completely flat fingered pose. Not the best pose, but I could spend quite a bit of time tweaking this, but I don't really want to waste all the time creating a finger pose here. All right. I think for the elbow, I'll go ahead and let's see. I'm gonna have it following the hand so I don't have to animate it. So I'll turn on the follow and then position it out here. So that way it should follow the hip. No, I guess it just follows the wrist, which should be okay once I constrain the hand to the gun. I guess what I can do is I'll just take this control on the gun, select it, shift select the IK control, go to constrain parent. Kind of a janky constraint setup that I've got here, but it'll work. It doesn't need to be perfect. Just want the hand to follow the position of the gun. And then now, if I move this, then this elbow will follow along. I want to make sure that pose stays the same for the finger, so I'm going to just delete all these keyframes. All right. Again, not the best hand or finger pose on that gun, but it's fine. We've got generally what should be happening. The gun, he's holding the gun, but it's kind of more like sort of like a resting position. There's probably a little bit too much movement on the arm. We could start cleaning that up. But generally, we're starting to get somewhere with the cycle. We can see it translating forward in space, but we're starting to actually get a cycle, get a patrol cycle that's working. And again, this is the workflow that I would use when working with motion capture data and kind of how I would clean it up and get a quick cycle in there. So now the main thing that we want to start tweaking are the feet. So to do this, I'm going to do this in the forward motion. So turning off the offset and play around with the position of the feet when it's planted. So we'll call this the plant pose, I guess, right here. So I'm going to zero out the X and Z. Because we had to move this into the floor, or move this lower, because when we applied the motion capture, the character was actually raised above the ground. So now translate Y, a value of 0, it's going to go through the floor, which is not really what we want. So we'll just we'll just call 21 the value for the foot on the floor. And I'm going to jump forward and probably just delete, because again, I don't want any sliding back and forth that's happening. So I'll take pose on frame 891. I can actually just delete a lot of these poses in between here, and then use the tween tool to copy the pose on 891. Keep that foot locked in place. So once it plants, it's going to stay locked. Doing that now, we can start to see the character is pretty off balance. And then I'm going to jump forward around like 9, 10. You can see we're getting a lot of shifting back and forth. I'm going to delete all of these keyframes. Copy that pose. And now you can see, since we don't have any of the actual foot sliding, the foot is going to be completely locked for all of this. So we're starting to get a pretty big hyperextension. So what I can do is just, is this the foot roll? Just increase that foot roll right here to actually get that nice bend in the knee. Delete all these keyframes to make sure it's transitioning nicely. It doesn't need to really start to peel off the ground yet. So I'm going to copy the pose before and get it something about like that. This is probably maybe a little bit too much. Delete those keyframes. Something like that. A little bit of knee jitter there. It's something I need to tweak on this. Let's see. Actually, you know what I think I need to do, looking at this now, which might help the kind of large stretch that's happening here, is that on frame 891, I think I want this foot to be a little bit further ahead. So what I'm going to do is select it, add a new animation layer, press S on frame 891, press S on like 880, and then I just want to shift this forward a bit, because it feels like that foot needs to be planting a little bit further ahead on that position. So I'll just add that layer there to have it moving further forward. And then doing that would mean that now it's not having such a quite far distance to travel or stay locked in place. So I can start reducing the foot roll here. Here, and then it starts lifting off the ground through here. All right, now I can select this foot again, take a look at that animation layer, and then probably on 910, I'm going to press S, and then I'm just going to scrub forward and like go to 922 and just zero out this layer to basically turn off that extra movement that we did. So now it's going back the way it was. So we've just added a little bit more of an extension on that foot planting there. So that feels a little bit better. Something like that. And again, right now I'm just really focusing on the left leg. You can see the right leg is doing a lot of crazy stuff. Like here, it needs to be probably out more. Feels like it's stepping really close. And another kind of tip, I would say, I guess you could consider it kind of a tip, is just when you're working with foot rolls, and you're kind of seeing me deal with this right now, is that the foot is going to need to come off the ground at some point. It's also going to need to rotate like it is at some point. but we're also using the foot roll control. So the foot roll control is great because you're able to get a really nice peel off, right? Because it's pivoting right where it needs to. But since you're also having to animate the actual foot control itself, that means you're going to have to counter animate. You're going to have to really do a little bit of adjustments as soon as that foot starts to come off the ground, because now you're dealing with the foot roll control animated and then the actual foot itself, because eventually the foot roll will need to kind of zero out to go flat. But as it's zeroing out, this foot is now rotating this way. So it's kind of, the controls are kind of doing these opposite thing at the same time right through here, which is how you can get some weird movement on the knee. So you're gonna have to go through here, and you can start to like frame by frame this, like one frame, maybe bring this up a little bit and start to adjust it that way. Or what you can do is what I actually usually do, and I might do that for the next step just to kind of show you, is that I might just not even touch this foot roll control and just decide that I'm only going to use the actual foot control to do any type of rotation, and then counter animate the toe control to keep the foot planted so it doesn't go through the floor. So let me actually show you kind of that process. It's just another method to take. You can still use the foot control if you want. It's definitely not a wrong way to do it, but sometimes it's easier to clean up movement if you're not having to deal with like counter animation all the time. So let's take this step, and I think I called this position right here technically the zeroed out floor position, 21.17. So I'll take that and paste that here. We'll kind of call that our floor position. So now I'm gonna delete all these keyframes, something like that. Delete all these, copy that pose. So now it's starting to lift off the ground. So let's see. I'm gonna rotate it back. So this can definitely get a little bit tricky too. Dealing with this, it's kind of like, I mean, either way, you might have to deal with some counter animation. I'm gonna delete these keyframes. And you can see me deleting these keyframes in here because a lot of times you don't need, obviously you don't always need your animation to be on ones like that. So it's easier to just knock out some keyframes to create a smoother transition, and you're not having to deal with and managing all those keyframes either. So something like that. Doesn't look the best, but we can work with it. Let me maybe start this a frame earlier. And it might be maybe moving a little bit, something feels a little bit off with it. And part of it is that we're also translating the foot at the same time. Now let's take this foot, control, flatten it out like that. Delete some of these keyframes. Something like that. Delete these keyframes. I'm going to take this position, start bringing that foot down because we still want to make sure the foot is on the ground. Also want to make sure that it's staying planted. So this forward translation, something like that. Delete some of these keyframes. See if that helps at all. Something like that. So we're basically, what we're doing here is we're manually creating the foot roll by rotating the foot control, countering that rotation with the toe control. And then we're actually starting to translate the foot up here to keep that knee bend. And so what that gives us is that there's a little bit of a trade-off basically you're dealing with, is that it's going to be harder to create that perfect foot roll pose because it's obviously much easier to do it, like get that foot roll, keeping the toe completely on the ground and having the foot kind of roll up like this. Obviously much easier to get that pose with this one control. But when it comes to actual movement and animation and the flow of the foot movement, is that it can be a little bit easier to get a cleaner transition from the foot peeling off the ground to the foot actually translating forward and lifting off the ground by just animating only the foot control itself, and by rotating the foot, translating the foot to create the foot roll. You're not having to counter animate the toe at the same time. So it can be a helpful way to do it. Kind of just all depends on how you like to work, really. And you can see we're still getting like a little bit of a jitter through here, and that just means that we probably need to start moving the foot earlier, a couple frames earlier, like that. All right, so just moving the foot movement, starting that foot movement 2 frames earlier, kind of removes that knee pop because it's flowing a little bit better. So that's just kind of something to keep in mind. But now the foot roll, not quite working, so maybe I'll remove 2 frames from that. And I might not have it rotated so far up here. Probably still need a little bit of that toe roll right in there. The foot definitely needs to be lifted off the ground a little bit earlier, so it's kind of just sliding forward and not lifting up at all in this moment, and then kind of quickly pops up. Let me take a look at the Translate Y. Yeah, you can see it here. What's happening with the Translate Y is that the foot is moving up a little bit, but it's mainly just moving forward, so the toes are just scraping along the ground, and then it quickly pops up here. So let's see if we can kind of fix this a little bit by creating a smoother transition here between this. Maybe deleting these keyframes and getting something a little bit more like that. The second step we did is a little bit cleaner than the first one. We also didn't spend too much time on this first one cleaning up that knee pop and counter animating it a little bit. There's like a hitch right here where it kind of stops and then picks up. This one feels a little bit cleaner. So that's usually how I deal with foot rolls, is that I would say most of the time I don't use the foot roll control. I just animate the foot itself, counter animate the toe. That way it's usually a little bit easier to actually get cleaner movement in the foot roll rather than having to deal with kind of the counter animation that you get. So let's quickly go through here. Let's call 973, the foot's on the ground. Might be a little bit earlier than that. I'll take this value on frame 891, paste it 973, delete this keyframe. And then you can see as I'm working, I'll just delete keyframes so I don't have to manage working frame by frame. I can just start to remove those keyframes. Gives me something a little bit less that I have to deal with, basically. So let's delete these keyframes through here. Use the tween tool right here to copy that pose. 993, delete these keyframes. And then through here, let's see, maybe lock a keyframe on 981 maybe, and then I'll do the same thing I did before. So I'll start to rotate the foot, add a little bit of translation to it to reduce that knee bend, or increase that knee bend actually. So that I think works a little bit better. And then 993, it'll be increased even more. Really start to kind of peel off the ground there as that other foot is planting. Maybe not translate quite so much forward, maybe be brought up a little bit. Delete these keyframes. Something like that. But you can see my process through here. Like if we just imagine like the leg in the back, the right leg is not there because it is kind of messing things up because the right leg is pretty janky as is. Like it's not falling in the right place. It's too crunched up in the body. This foot needs to be planting more like out here probably. But at least just focusing on the character's left leg here, just by making a few adjustments, we're able to kind of clean up that movement there. Still got some knee popping, but generally the movement's looking somewhat decent. Again, with this workflow that I'm using here, this is, again, the process that I would take. I'd get that motion capture in there, that treadmill cycle in there, basically making sure the first and last pose are the same, and then just start going in there, tweaking the feet, starting to get the movement kind of behaving how I want, basically. Right here, I'll counter animate the toe again. Starting to move too early. All right. This, and then I'm going to need to adjust the foot rising off the ground again. Again, we're getting the same thing where it's kind of just flattened out a bit. The foot's more translating forward than it is moving up. So let me delete this keyframe, shift this key up here, then shift this up here, and just get something a bit more like that. I think the foot's moving maybe a little bit too far back. Can take a look at the translate Z. And that transition's pretty good there. You can see that there's like a little bit of translation issues happening with the foot. It feels like it moves back and then forward. So you need to finesse this translation that's happening here. Maybe just copying this value, pasting it here, seeing if that helps. It's still moving back a little bit. And do that. I'll just real quickly work on. Haven't really looked at the foot in the front position yet. Mainly just thinking about the forward back and the planting. So let's take a look at this foot now. Pose 1, the foot's all rotated, so I'm going to zero out those. Let's take a look at the floor and copy this value here. All right, and then delete some of these keyframes in here because I don't want to deal with all those. So I'll just, and I know the foot's going to be planted, so I'll just copy that pose. So there's things like the rotation of the foot I'm probably going to adjust later. Like I don't want the foot completely rotated out. But actually, maybe I'll adjust that real quick because it's like for everything, it's just rotated really far, pointed outward. So I'm just going to take the rotate Y, select all of those keyframes, that entire control curve, and just bring it in like that. See how that looks. I think that already looks quite a bit better. Maybe bring it back out just a tiny bit. Then I'm going to take the pole vector, translate X, all of it, and just bring it back out. So the knee's not pointed inward, but something like that works. All right, so now let's jump forward. Foot's going to rotate like that. Might need to be something like that. And then I'm going to copy the pose at the beginning using the tween tool because I don't think I need it moving quite that much. Maybe just a little bit can start to peel off the ground. Like that, and then delete all these keyframes. Delete all these in the middle. Probably not have it move so far forward. Something like that might work. Some knee jitter in there, but for the most part. It's working okay. All right, let's just move forward. Right in here, don't like the position of that, so I'm gonna add a layer. 910, I'm gonna drop a keyframe at 896, so I have 2 keyframes there. I'm gonna shift the foot forward, like that. Keep it there, and then let's see, 930 to 940, I'm gonna zero that back out. So now it's not using any of that value there. Something like that. Then what I might actually do is let me select the base layer, shift or control select actually the anim layer 4, and I'll just merge those. Just to make sure I don't mess anything up or accidentally add a new movement to that layer, just bake that back down. And then now I can work with it here. So zero out these, move that keyframe, move that one. So now the foot's kind of just planting right there. Delete all of these. And I'm not really, again, not looking at the left and right of the foot really. So like right here, the foot might look better if it was under the body a little bit more, but that's something we can adjust when we're more looking at the actual left and right of the foot, versus really the important thing right now is just the forward back. Something like that. And one thing we might run into moving the foot that far forward, we might have to reduce it a bit. We can see, so like in here, I want the foot to stay back, obviously not go that far inward. Like that. Delete these keyframes. Something like that works. All right, let's jump forward. Let's say the foot's completely planted here. Bring it down just a little bit. All right, and then delete these keyframes. That doesn't look great. I actually want to land maybe a frame earlier, so I'll just move that there. Something like that works okay. So this, again, this is just a quick pass over the feet. This pass is just thinking about like the main forward back movement. Basically, I'm just trying to get a pass where the feet are more locked down and they're not sliding back and forth. But then there would be, you know, another pass after this where I actually go over everything again and go through things like arcs. So I'd turn on the arc tracker and then go through here and like clean up all the arcs, make sure they're actually flowing nicely. Like the arcs through here are okay, but you can see it's more of, it's like pretty pointed. So it's like linear through here, goes down. Whereas you might want something just that feels a little bit more kind of rounded off there. So that's something to keep in mind through here too. But again, like this pass is like just thinking about the feet sliding. So like you can see here, the foot is sliding all the way back. Getting rid of that kind of stuff is like what this pass, this first sort of like foot pass is for cleaning up cycles. Same through here. Foot's moving too far in. Something like that. Bring it up. Start to get a little bit of bend in the knee there. Delete all these keyframes. Move the foot back. And then now this right here is to maybe a little bit too far from the body. So like looking at the foot planting here, I think I actually wanted to plant more like here. And then I can copy that pose through these. So the foot's a little bit more forward. Delete these keyframes. Like that. So like again, like the feet are like swinging really wide, which we don't want. What is going on here? I just need to delete these keyframes. Reduce some of the ones in there. Take a look at the translate X and this like pop in. You can reduce that. And then take a look at this last plant. Make sure it's right in the right position. So it's planted on the ground there. Something like that. And then what I'm going to do is go to frame 878 and I'm going to turn on offset. And then I'm going to go to the world space tool. I'm going to select it, go to frame 1000, paste it to make sure it's the same now. And then I'll also make sure to copy the pose here. Something like that. So again, like the feet are like swinging really far wide, which we don't really want. What you could do, because like they're moving so far wide, coming in, even wider here. You could just do something where like maybe you just delete all this movement, the in and out movement, and maybe like just start fresh and just remove it all and then go back and actually add the side to side movement that you want. And I think already that feels better. So like I like some of this stuff that we're getting here, like right the swing out here and the swing in. It's just way too much. So like one thing you could do, and I feel like it's a lot cleaner on this left foot. Like the right foot was like just kind of one step was like really far in, the next step was like really far out, so it wasn't consistent. But at least this one you can look at the curve and you can see like the curves are pretty consistent as far as like how far it moves out and then how far it moves back in. So like it's a pretty consistent in and out movement that we're getting there. So if you want to, you could maybe just reduce some of this movement that's happening using like the push-pull tool to kind of bring some of that in. So it's not so exaggerated, but you get to keep some of that movement. So that's one method you could use. So I might do that on this foot or this step as well, something like that. But then that's something we would want to add in to this foot now, is like thinking about, so as it steps through here, maybe we can insert a keyframe, swings out here, insert a keyframe here, maybe it's out like that. Maybe we can start it a little bit earlier. So it goes out and then in right on the plant. So we bring that back up toward here, and then maybe the amount that the foot is actually in might be a little bit too much. So I might grab all those keyframes and shift them down just a little bit. So it kind of goes out back in. So we're creating a very similar movement there, but we're just not having to deal with all those keyframes. And then like you can see, like using the offset mode, it's it's easier to work on stuff like this, the side to side movement of the feet, right? You're not having the character translating forward. You can just focus just on the offset, just looking at the feet side to side movement, looking at the knee left and right, and like really fine tune the movement of the feet through here. Much easier to do when it's in offset mode. So one thing that I feel like is happening on this is I think I want to do, let's see, I think he might be lean too far back maybe. Let me just select the root control, add a new animation layer, and maybe like tweak the pose just a little bit. Maybe something like that. I think that works a little bit better. Cool. Yeah, I think that works. Feels a little bit better. Maybe the chest could be rotated out too far that way. You could tweak, add an animation layer, and maybe play around with how does it feel if the chest is like rotated in a bit. Oops. Set a keyframe. Something like that. That might work a little bit better. So it feels, you're still in that sort of like this character's patrolling around, but there's a little bit more of it's still like an alert aggression to him. Like he's not, like before both of these, he was kind of just lean, like really far back, like really kind of just relaxed. Where this, it keeps him like a little bit more forward. And then taking a look at the arms again, probably want to take the shoulder control. So I'm going to add a keyframe or a layer there. I might bring the shoulder in a bit like that. Just get the shoulder involved a bit more as far as the posing goes, because I want to get the gun closer to the left hand so it doesn't feel so kind of reaching out there. And then on this, I'll shift it out. And then on the shoulder, I'm going to add a keyframe. Adjust this shoulder. Something like that, maybe. And I don't know if I like that. Let me see. No, I don't like it because I tweaked this too far up. Let me see. It's not too far up, but maybe something like that. I just felt like this shoulder is like really high. I think something like that might work better. And I can select this control. Let me bring it out. All right. So generally this is just a nice kind of quick first pass, getting the feet at least not sliding around. Still some knee popping that you would need to clean up. May need to do adjustments on looking at this very first step. The gait here on this right foot could be adjusted just a little bit. It feels like he's stretching. The distance between the feet is pretty far on that step versus the other steps. So might need to kind of tweak that foot position a little bit. But like overall, just taking the raw motion capture data and just creating a quick cycle for it. It's a really quick method when you change that motion capture data into like that treadmill cycle. Much easier to find those, first and last poses, making sure your poses are exactly the same at the start. And then just starting to go in here and starting to clean up things. And so like looking at this cycle, this might be something that I would throw into the engine just to start to test and see what it looks like. If this were like an enemy character walking around, just, looking at this cycle in game and seeing how it feels. If you're like looking at this at least somewhat from afar, watching these enemies kind of like could patrol whatever area they're patrolling. And, how does this look? Does it feel too casual? Is the speed working and that kind of thing. Usually with games, you'll probably have whatever the speed needs to be already completely in mind. So you would already know, like, as far as like the traveling speed moving forward, like what that speed needs to be, you'd probably already be working with the exact speed that you need to make sure that you animate it as. So that would kind of dictate when we changed and added the forward movement to our main control. if we had the exact speed in mind that we needed, then we could just plug that in here and we would know that we're, animating at the right speed, and then we adjust our foot positions as needed. But like stuff like this, like with the arm here, looking at this, so generally we've got some pretty decent movement with the arm. There's a few moments where it's too much, like right here, like it whips back right really close to the body quickly versus every other step that he's doing. So it feels like a weird quick adjustment there. So we could go in here and maybe select all the control curves for the arm and like find that quick movement. Like right in here, select the XYZ. I should be able to, let's see. Yeah, there we go. Come in here and you could select these keyframes right in here and just use your push pull and like reduce that movement a bit so it's not as much. So you can see we already reduced that quite a bit. So that's something you can do, is like go through here and start tweaking things as needed. Something else that you could do, and something that I do pretty often, is that if like I feel like the movement is just like a little bit too jittery and it might be too much of a headache to try to clean things up when they're on ones like this, is that sometimes I might just go in here and I'll bake all this arm movement down to maybe like 3s. So it's going to retain the majority of that movement, but it's not going to have a keyframe on every single frame, which just makes it easier to clean up. So if I bake it on 3s, it's not a huge sample, so it's not like I'm baking on like 10s or something where we would lose the majority of that movement. So we'll still have a keyframe every 3rd frame, and if I hit bake, it breaks it. What is going on? Oh, I think, yeah, let me undo that. I actually need to make sure I merge this animation layer, because the animation layer actually has the pose change that we created. So let me see here. Let me make sure I merge. So this is the pose and then the shoulder. Let me actually select this and then this top one here. Oops, no, this one. So it's layer 6 and 2, and I'll just merge these. And then what we can do is select these controls, go to edit, keys, bake simulation, bake on 3s. There we go. That works. So now you still have all that movement that was there before, but you're at least working with less keyframes. You can come in here and kind of start with the upper arm, start with the X rotation, kind of look at your curve and see kind of where some of these jitters might be coming in, like what you actually need, starting to kind of go control by control, cleaning things up. And another method that you can take is that sometimes it can be easier to just start completely fresh with the arm movement. And let's just select the shoulder, the arm controls, and delete all these keyframes. So this is like a really kind of destructive sort of method, obviously, is because you're removing all that data that was there. But sometimes, depending on the quality of the data, sometimes it can be easier to actually get cleaner movement by just, right now the arm is in local space, so it's following the body's movement. So you can see we're getting some like decent movement. It's just following the body. So we're getting some like movement in the arm. It's following 1-to-1 with the body, so it does feel like it's glued to the body, which doesn't look great, but we're at least working with something that feels a little bit cleaner with that motion. And another trick that you can use for this, which I really like to do, is that I'll delete all that motion. I'll make sure that my root control is on local space. So by that, I mean I can move the chest around and the arms following. If I come in here and I change this global to 10, oops, wrong control, the arm is going to try to stay in that same orientation, which is not what we want really. So what I'm going to do for this is that I want to take all the movement that's happening on the arm that is basically getting inherited from what the chest is doing. So we have the arm like following the chest one-to-one. So basically what we can do is, I'm actually going to show you using the world bake tool. In case you don't have Animbot, again, the script is completely free. So I'll open it up, world bake, I'll bake on ones. I'll select the shoulder control. I'll do bake selection to locators. So it's going to bake all that movement that's happening on the arm to locators. So you can see we have all the rotational data from that arm based on the rotation that is being in local space following the body's movement. And then now what we can do is select the arm control, go to global. I'm going to change this to a value of 1. So now the arm is not following the body's movement. The orientation is trying to stay, facing forward there, staying in its orientation. And I'm going to select the locator. I'm going to go bake from locators, bake selection back to the objects. So now I've basically just pasted all of that arm movement back onto the controls. So it looks now exactly the same as it did. However, we have all this new rotation information on this control curve. So what we can do is let's select the control. I'm going to select all the keyframes there. I'm going to go to curves, pre-infinity cycle, post-infinity cycle. I'll make sure I'm viewing my infinity curves. And then now what I can do is just start shifting all these keyframes forward a couple frames. So now we're getting like free offset with the arm. So the arm is going to be offset 2 frames from what the body's doing. So now it doesn't feel like it's following one-to-one with the body movement. It feels like it's following the body's movement because it is an arm, but it's offset a couple frames. So now we're getting some really nice offset movement with the gun. That's much cleaner than it was, but we got basically all this animation for free just by first having it in local space, using this world bake tool to basically save all that rotation information, setting it to world space and then pasting it back on. And then we can start adjusting the offset. And we can even offset this even more and see how that looks. Probably look a little bit strange with the gun that much offset, but you can kind of get the idea of what you can start to adjust by doing this. I think something like that works. And we can turn this back onto the forward motion. Something else I feel like looking at this now is it feels like he might be leaning a little too far forward. So I'm going to select the root control, go to layer 4. I'm just going to shift him back. It felt like he was almost like too far in front of his feet. And that's going to mess up the foot placement a little bit, but I feel like that actually works a little bit better. I just felt like he was a little bit too far forward. So that's probably something we should have done at the beginning. So then when we animated the feet, it would have matched up better and there wouldn't be quite as much popping hyperextension on the feet. But I do feel like looking at it now, seeing again, once we turn the offset back off, like here, you couldn't really notice because it's treadmill, but once you actually see it translating in space, it just felt like the hips were like a little too far forward. So it just felt like he was almost leaning. His hips were a little bit in front of his feet, not directly above him where they would need to be. So yeah, I think that's going to wrap it up for this video. Obviously, there's a ton of cleanup that we need to do, but this is really, I just wanted to show you the process that I would take for taking raw motion capture data that was captured, bring it into Maya, especially for strictly locomotion, because locomotion can be pretty difficult. But I find that once you're saving that motion capture data, transferring it to a treadmill cycle so there is no forward motion, makes it a lot easier to start cleaning things up in Maya, start editing the cycle as you need to, start adding the adjustments that you need to, and then actually adding that forward movement back onto the cycle itself. So again, that's just the process I take. There's definitely a ton of cleanup that still needs to be done, but I find this method allows me to basically take what we have here, get something really quick for kind of the idea that we need or the purpose of this animation, which in this case is a character kind of patrolling around an environment. We can take this, bring it into the engine, start looking at it in engine, see how it looks, bring it back into Maya, make our adjustments.